If there's one thing that will keep you working in the music industry, it's following through on your word, aka getting done. And this video will help make sure that happens. Whether you're a full-time audio professional already or working to get there, these 5 productivity tips will help you hit your deadlines and balance your life. Welcome back to the show. I'm Travis Ferentz, a Grammy-nominated blah, blah, blah. Doesn't really matter for this one. What matters for this one is I work 3 days a week and I probably mix close to 200 songs a year while doing this podcast and YouTube channel and being a dad. There's a common misconception that hard work is better work and that if you're always working, then you must be productive. Now, there's no denying that putting hours of hard work in will get things done, but that definitely doesn't mean that you're productive. I've had seasons of my life where I cranked 18-hour days regularly, and they definitely helped me learn a lot and build my career to where it is today. But eventually, it's just not sustainable. And even if it was, are you really doing your best work on hour 17? So before we dive into these, I have to say that I am fully a productivity nerd, but I am also not perfect. At times, I've taken these productivity hacks so far that I think they've actually made me less productive. But these 5 tips have proven to help me every time when I do them. And that's the key. You've got to do this stuff. If you can't sit here and commit to actually trying these things, then you should probably just click on to whatever the latest plugin review is. So with that, on to the 5 tips that I do every day that help me deliver for my clients. First up, have a plan. Nothing says failure to launch like walking into your studio with no clue what you're gonna do that day. When I sit down at the computer without a game plan, I immediately find myself in my email or down some rabbit hole checking out some piece of gear or productivity trick, which is pretty ironic, right? But my most productive days start the day before. I try to stay in the habit of having a shutdown routine to help me close out my day. And part of that routine is to look at what I was trying to get done that day and decide what I need to focus on for the next day. And the bonus to this is that it helps keep overwhelm at bay. When you've got an open loop, like not knowing when you'll find time to finish something, then you have this constant layer of stress just wearing you down a little bit, minute by minute. But if you end your day by planning the next, you can rest easy that night knowing that you've made time for everything. The last piece of the have a plan equation is that you need to know what your priorities are. And remember that priorities are not always goals. Goals are often more long-term. Example, one of my goals right now is to hit 10K subs on this channel. But that's not a priority. I have a priority based on that goal, which is to put out the best content I can once a week. Now, this is a good time to pause the video and ask yourself, what are my top 3 priorities? And more importantly, are they reflected on your calendar? How would they be reflected on your calendar, you ask? Well, because you do some form of time blocking, right? Which is our second tip. Time blocking is the act of putting actual blocks of time in your calendar for specific tasks or projects. Essentially, planning your day from start to finish based on what you need to get done. Now, from my experience, it is possible to overdo this and also very possible to underdo it. I've tried going over the top, blocking 5-minute intervals and entering stuff like drive time or lunch into my calendar. When I went that far, I found that I was mostly just wasting time physically entering all of these things. And on the other side of that, I've put general blocks in my calendar for 4 hours that just say podcast. And I find that leads to very little forward progress because it's so vague. When you time block, it has to at least be specific enough for you to know what you're supposed to do during that block. Now, there is a huge caveat to time blocking though, which is that you need to understand how long things take you. Otherwise, you'll be planning an unrealistic day, and that's pretty self-defeating when you never get what you need to get done. I've spent years running a timer while doing projects, so I have a pretty good idea of how long things take me. Let's look at a mix, for example. I know that I need about 6 hours, give or take, to get a solid first mix ready to go out to the client. I'll typically break that up into 2 days, probably 2-3 hour blocks. And do things take longer sometimes? Definitely, regularly. But rarely do they take double or triple my expectations. A couple hours here or there is easy enough to manage if you're doing some kind of end-of-day planning routine. Now, the answer to why time blocking works lies in Parkinson's law, which states that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. This is essentially why we're always racing to hit a deadline, even if the project has been going for weeks. If you don't set bounds on the work, it'll drag on. I experienced the power of setting time bounds firsthand when my daughter was super young. You'd be surprised how much you can get done during a 2-hour infant nap if you set out with a plan for that time. So to summarize, if you understand your time and block things in your calendar properly, then you can avoid overcommitting yourself. And when you get really good at time blocking, schedule yourself some downtime, which is our third tip. If you want to be more productive, then you've got to be operating at your best. The only way to do that is to actually take time off to rest. If you push yourself to the limit every day, I guarantee that you are not getting work done as fast or as well as you could if you weren't. This quote from Greg McKeown is a pretty good rule of thumb. Don't do more today than you can completely recover from tomorrow. I caught that in an interview he did with Matt D'Avella, I think, and they were discussing his new book, Effortless, which was immediately added to my reading list. And in that conversation, he brought up a concept that really resonated with me. He mentioned having not just a lower bound for the amount of work, but also an upper bound, basically a maximum. And he used an example from history, which was super interesting. 2 teams of explorers racing to be the first to reach the South Pole. One, a British team who basically trekked as far as they could every single day, regardless of the weather, and a Norwegian team who did no more than 15 miles every day, even if they were physically able to. So by having that upper bound, the Norwegian team maintained a steady pace for the entire journey and ultimately reached the South Pole first, more than 30 days before the British team did. But more importantly, they also had the energy and stamina to return to their ship, unlike the British team who never made it back from the South Pole. Now, that's obviously an extreme example, but I think the point is pretty clear. In today's super connected world, it has never been more important to make sure that you are eventually done for the day. You need that upper bound so that you can go home and recharge. And by the way, leaving the studio and then checking your email on the couch all night, that doesn't count. That keeps your brain in work mode the whole time. And I'm super guilty of this. I often think about work long after I'm done. But I have found that when I'm diligent about doing my shutdown routine, I'm way more likely to actually be done working and be present for my family. So you've got to close those open loops for yourself. Which brings us to the next tip: write things down. Now, it sounds basic, but we just don't really do it. Here's an example. What's the next thing you need to do for a current project? Who do you need to text back? What do you need to invoice for? What do you currently need from the grocery store? Okay, so how many of those things I just mentioned do you have written down? If you had all that bouncing around in your head, then I'm guessing you also complain about having a hard time focusing. David Allen, one of the OG productivity authors, says it best with, "The mind is for having ideas, not holding them." Our brains might be super powerful, but psychologists suggest that they function best when only focusing on a few things, like 2 or 3. So if you want to be more effective at everything you're doing, then you don't want to be storing every commitment and task you have in your mind. Get all those things down on paper, calendar, or in a task manager so that you can focus on the task at hand without your mind telling you to get milk on the way home. Anytime I'm feeling stress and overwhelm, it's usually because I need to do a huge task brain dump. Getting all that down into a database and then assigning a time to do it immediately relieves a ton of stress. So as you can see, this is where all these steps start to come together. If you're planning and in control of your schedule and you have a trusted to-do list, it all starts to snowball into actually becoming more productive. And lastly, you've got to do focused work. If Pro Tools crashes, the first thing I do is grab my phone and start swiping, which is probably the worst thing I could do. I was in the zone, and now I'm gonna wander down 30 different rabbit holes. Here's a shocking statistic that I think will really hammer the importance of this home. It takes an average of 23 minutes to refocus after a distraction. So that computer glitch and swipe fest essentially just cost me a half hour, which is pretty crazy. So here's what you do. Don't check your email while you're in the middle of one of your work blocks. In fact, make a time block for checking email because it is the ultimate distraction. Next, silence your phone. Better yet, leave it in another room or on the couch behind you. Now, a lot of people might say, I can't silence my phone. What if my kid's school calls or something like that? If you've got an iPhone, the focus modes are now customizable. They have been for a while. I have one called Work. And the only notifications that come through are from my wife, my parents, and the home security and baby cam apps. Remember, 99% of the notifications that pop up on your device are not urgent, and they can for sure wait until you are out of your deep work block. I mentioned earlier how much work I could get done during one of my daughter's naps. This is why. I had so little focused work time then that I had to be sure that there were zero interruptions. So now that you're a more productive music professional, it is time to fast track your career. Shave a couple years off your journey with this video here.